New York is a beautiful day today. It's a little warmer. I mean, I shouldn't say warmer. It's kind of hot. But anyway, it's a little bit the problem this morning is our espresso machine was broken, so it was a little panic, but it hasn't fixed yet. But he's coming. Just wait 1 minute. Thank you. Maybe we should close the window.
Yep.
It's a little bit quiet. Ouch!
Oh, I guess even later. Crazy. Put this somewhere over here, I think. Okay. Hello. Are you actually are you ready now or not yet?
We are all ready.
Okay. Well, hello. Any of you who actually have decided to hang on while I've come so late, unbelievably. This is the latest I think it's ever been, which is another indication that I really should move to another format for this, but somehow the timing doesn't quite work. Let me get some more coffee, though. And we had all sorts of little technical issues with things like coffee machine and stuff like that, espresso machine. Oh, can you hear me, or am I just mumbling inaudibly? In any case, I have had many things I've been thinking to talk about, but I think I will limit myself to very little, in fact, and centering around the banality of evil. Now, as this is actually the 60th year since the trial of Adolf Eichmann, I've been revisiting this book by the philosopher, reporter, Hannah Arendt, Eichmann in Jerusalem. And it says, a report on the banality of evil. Okay, that says, I always found it to be a rather remarkable book in a way, very tremendously thoughtful and very much misunderstood. I'm not going to take the time to actually explicate what is in here, but I will a little bit explain why I think it was misunderstood, has been misunderstood, I say. In any case, here we go. So Adolf Eichmann, who was known as the architect of the Holocaust, he was charged in Israel with huge crimes against humanity, murder of millions of people. Now, Eichmann's title was Chief Nazi Logistics Coordinator. Now, the logistics that he coordinated, of course, was the systematic rounding up and deportation of millions of Jews, homosexuals, gypsies, other people, to their deaths in concentration camps. American forces did capture Eichmann at the end of World War II, but somehow he escaped from prison in 1946. I don't really know the details about that, and that's not pertinent to what I'm talking about now, of course. Then in 1960, finally, Israeli intelligence agents abducted him, captured him in Argentina, and flew him back to Israel to face trial. The trial began in April 1961, which 60 years ago, and of course went on several months for that. I was at that time quite little, and I just remember it in a kind of sort of fog of memory from the time. It's as I think my parents maybe shielded me from the dramatic horror of it all, of the trial. Now, of course, he sat inside a bulletproof glass box so that he would be able to face his official, I should say, the official verdict and his official destiny. Now, Eichmann and his court-appointed attorney, I say, maintained that he was just following superior's orders. Now, Hannah Arendt did argue that he was simply someone looking out for his own personal advancement, and that he did not have particular motives, but never quite realized what he was doing. I think that's a quotation taken a little bit out of context from the book, but it is something which was the cause for a lot of blowback against it. The two, I should say, one of the prosecutors, Gabriel Bach, and one of the investigators, Mikhail Goldman Gilead, in Israel, are still alive, and they gave interviews recently. Now, of course, Bloch flatly denies Arendt's conclusion that Eichmann was simply what would you say? Simply carrying out orders, and that without any kind of deep evil motive for that, but the evil came from the situation. And of course, Bach did explain, and it was found out that before the trial, earlier, Eichmann had regretted, in fact, not doing more to kill Jews in particular. And Bach did find numerous examples, as I read here, where Eichmann did take affirmative steps to prevent any Jewish person from being spared or shown mercy in the concentration camps. Okay, now, why am I talking about this, and why have I been thinking about this a lot? Because, of course, this was an extreme example of, in a certain way, I could say the corporatization of evil. And how Eichmann was simply a part of this corporation that doing his job. And his job was part of the job was making sure that the maximum number of Jews and others in the concentration camps were killed. Okay, so that's the job. Now, you had in 2015, you have a racist shooter murdered 9 black worshipers in Charleston, South Carolina. And you have white supremacists chanting, "Jews will not replace us." And in Charlottesville, invoking racist symbols and Nazi symbols. 2018, a gunman killed 11 Jewish worshipers inside a synagogue in Pittsburgh. And in January 6th, at the Capitol riot, I should say, people now call it an insurrection, some of the rioters wore neo-Nazi gear, neo-Nazi clothing, etc. And also there's a shirt emblazoned with Camp Auschwitz. A member of Congress just recently also, I won't say any names, but I think it's obvious, actually made this ridiculous remark which trivialized the true horror of the Holocaust. And last week, this was the barracks at Auschwitz were defaced with anti-Semitic graffiti and Holocaust-denying slogans. So, there definitely is this undercurrent of evil. Now, my point is that evil in itself is banal, has great banality, that because it simply focuses on the fact that the other is not worthy of what we can call human attention. In a way. That it's not so. And that there is, in a systemic aspect to this sense of tribal insularity, we can call it. I'm sort of going about this way, that way. Anyway, now, the Smithsonian just now had an article taken from the Washington Post, which is, I found very interesting. And the reporter Gillian Brockwell cites a study published in Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, which outlines evidence, as I read here, that Confederate monuments in the United States, this is monuments for people who were prominent in the Confederacy during the Civil War, who were pro-slavery, who were trying to have the South secede from the Union in order, in fact, to legitimize the principle of slavery, not only slavery itself, but the idea of that slavery was not something that should be abolished, that was a horror of humanity. Okay, now, this is interesting, so that researchers at the University of Virginia found that in former Confederate states, counties with higher numbers of Confederate monuments had higher numbers of lynchings, of murderings of black African Americans between 1832 and 1950, and that the trend consistent with the position that Confederate memorializations reflect a racial history, one marred by intentions to terrorize and intimidate black Americans in response to black progress, that these monuments actually reflected that trend. Another thing is that most of these monuments, though, were constructed rather after the Civil War. Now, I'll give you a few more terrible statistics, though. Right after the Civil War, this is the period of Reconstruction, 1865 to 1876, they said there was violence against nearly 2,000 black Americans, according to the study. And this was the time when the Constitution was revised to grant basic rights to those who were formerly enslaved. And of course, the lynchings were intended to maintain white supremacy, suppress civil rights, and terrorize people, of course, people of color. Now, what's very interesting is that you have these killings, racially motivated killings, between 1877 and 1950, and the rate of these killings, actually, or number, I should say, these killings, does correspond rather closely with the construction of different monuments for these Confederate so-called heroes. As I said, even when controlling for demographic factors like population numbers, the researchers found that county-level frequency of lynchings predicts county-level frequency of Confederate memorializations, which are basically statues, etc., for so-called Confederate heroes. Okay, now this is finally, the paper cites a speech by a Confederate veteran in 1913 at a dedication ceremony for the University of North Carolina's Silent Sam Monument. There he claimed that Confederate soldiers saved the very life of the Anglo-Saxon race in the South, and that must be memorialized in a way, you see. Okay. So the point is that we have symbols which reinforce, I would say, stereotypical hatred. And these symbols, very public symbols, which are put up by the state in a way, and train goes by and I lose my train of thought. I'm thinking of the train. Oh gosh. Okay. So that these symbols give a public as a kind of systemic affirmation of these feelings of stereotypical hatred. You see that way. Okay. And now I go to Facebook. I'm on Facebook, but what since the beginning of October has been in the news has been the whistleblower, especially Frances Haugen. I guess that's how you pronounce her name, and also another one, Sophie Zhang, who actually gave thousands of articles of material, a lot of material, documenting issues at Facebook. Now, I'm probably saying this now, and I may be erased from Facebook myself for this. If I am, that's okay. So this is on CNN, I'm quoting now, that the Facebook whistleblower who released tens of thousands of pages of internal research and documents indicated that the company was aware of various problems caused by its apps and its potential toxic effect on teen girls especially, but not only. And that she mentioned, I'm here today because this is before Congress, when she was testifying, because I believe that Facebook's products harm children, stoke division, and weaken our democracy. The company's leadership knows how to make Facebook and Instagram safer, but won't make the necessary changes because they have put their astronomical profits before people. Now, what does this have to do with what I was saying before? That this is another case of, in a certain sense, the banality of evil, we can say. And this is a case where, well, yes, we would love to do something. We feel for this. This is different in a way from Eichmann, and I will talk about that also. But of course, we do what we can with the restrictions that we can only do so much because that's the way it is. And of course, things are a little more complicated than this because in general, what social media has done is increase the tribalization of groups of people. And you see also that social media has enabled a kind of mask for people to behave in much more radical ways than they would in person, I would say. And also to what should I say, downplay the effects by saying this is just fun. This is nothing, of course. And issues of censorship are very complex in a way, and I don't get into that right now. But the fact is, in any case, that you have the companies, whether it is Facebook or ExxonMobil or Phillips Tobacco, sort of preaching one way and acting a different way, of course, simply because that is the way business should be conducted. In a sense. Okay. Now, this is, of course, different from Eichmann, but I don't see it so incredibly different. The difference is that you have a whole state actually providing this umbrella of security for someone like Eichmann to believe that what he is doing is not bad. Anyway. Now, with companies, we don't have the actual whole state giving support to this. So what you do have is a kind of I become tongue-tied often. It's, as I mentioned, it's happened since I was very little. I don't know. I think more in music than I do in language, and I also have different words in different languages coming into my brain that sort of explain things. Anyway, okay, that's enough of my mea culpa. But yeah, so the companies have to somehow put on one face for the larger state, let's say, and at the same time have their own sort of, I should say, tribal enclave in a way, where they think that, well, they're doing that, but what we are doing is okay because it's okay for us. Now, this is all interesting to me. And one more thing in this kind of realm of things is an Ars Nova article I read about recently about Hacker X. And I won't say his name, but he actually mentioned his name, and you can look up the article if you like. And this was an American who was the one who built, actually, its pro-Trump fake news empire. There's been, there was a lot of, has been, and still is a lot of accusations against Russian hacking. That's right, Russian hacking. But in fact, this internal hacking and building of bots and of apps about which and of fake news outlets is perhaps has actually been more important and more pervasive. And one of the companies involved is called Koala Media. Now, Koala Media worked through Facebook. Here we go again. This is part of it. This was basically a company which specialized in fake news, whether it was fake treatments for diseases or fake accusations about different things that people in the news did, etc., etc. They said they were reaching about 3 million people weekly, and this hacker X, who did a lot to design the software involved with this, he started studying the connection between koala headlines and the emotions they triggered among readers. And showed that particular headline will actually elicit a particular emotion in people. This is, I should say, in a certain way, Pavlov on steroids. So soon enough, koalas published news pieces reached over 30 million people a week. This is starting from 3 million people, 30 million people a week. And what this fellow said to the news reporters, he said, "I was completely caught off guard while pushing nonstop Trump news through the election cycle." This is 2016. One of our websites was the #1 Google search result for the term Trump news. That was fake news site completely. At one point, then Trump himself retweeted a shout out from the Twitter account @Debateless. Now that account was set up by this hacker X. Again, Trump, a fake news Twitter site. That's okay. Now the question is, why did this fellow do this, as he said? And he's come out and he's been very contrite about what he did. He did it basically because it was interesting. You see. And this is a problem. Now, we go back to this banality of evil. And I think inside, going back to Nazi Germany, in fact, and not only Nazi Germany, of course, this is just an extreme example. Inside, you do have there definitely was a feeling that something was very wrong. And we can see that clearly because, first of all, in the beginning, the Nazi machine, I should say, tried to hide what the final solution really was. And then, as they were facing defeat at the end of the Second World War, they tried very hard to erase evidence of the final solution. Now, if this were something that people would be proud of, actually, that this was something that, yes, we did something which was good for humanity, let's say, by obliterating all these unworthy characters who are not really people. Say, if that's something that they say we think really is good, then why did they take so much trouble to try to first hide and then erase evidence of this? Obviously, they knew that what they were doing was despicably wrong. But inside, there would be people who believed that this was actually a righteous cause. You see, this is the part of the problem. Now, the investigator during the trial of Eichmann, that is Michael, I should say, Goldman Gilead. I end with his little statement that he made to the news. He said, "With the death of Eichmann, the murderous ideology of nationalist socialism was not scattered. It is still existing in the form of hatred that is dangerous, and we must be on guard so that catastrophes do not repeat themselves." And in his own words, he said once again, "We must educate the new generation not to hate and to avoid such hatred. Otherwise, our struggle against such evil will be in vain." So, that, I think, is very, very wise. That's why education and cultural education in the true sense of the word is most important. And that's why I talk about this for the people who are watching, for you who are watching this, and who will listen, who are I'd say, emissaries of culture. That way. Okay. Just one more thing. I changed the subject completely, but I go back still to the Smithsonian, because this is one thing very nice that another little article from them. And that was they found evidence in the Alps from ancient poop, I can say, that contains fungi used in brewing beer and in cheese making. So it seems that at least in the Alpine regions of Europe, at least 2,700 years ago, so these mines to date from, I would say, they must have enjoyed blue cheese and beer. I enjoy that myself. So fermented food has been around very, very long time. Of course, if I'm still correct in what I read so many years ago, that the earliest written, or so I should say, evidence of writing was a recipe for beer itself, that fermentation and intoxication in a certain way have been with us since the beginning of civilization. And I think will stay with us. And why do I mention this? No idea. But I thought that it's a lot of fun after the tragedy which I was detailing just a few moments before that. Okay. I don't think I'm going to play the clarinet today for you, but I do promise that I will, either in video or live, be playing for you next week. That way, because next I've wanted to do a presentation about what I call the value of etudes. But today I just want to mention two things. First, I go to another aside, and about reeds. Okay, and this is just what I'm going to say is really nonsense complete. But I've experimented with pretty much everything with reeds. Well, setting them aside, oiling them, putting even a substance called peg, which was a wood preserver used in museums to preserve ancient wood sculptures. I've used knives, Dutch rush to do all sorts of things, sandpaper, everything. And so I do actually have very good knowledge of reeds, of what to do for reeds. And I also have a lot of reeds that I've been going through. And this is not a lot of them. This is just a tiny bit. And one thing, this year and a half of pandemic, when especially earlier when I was just at home doing nothing else except pontificating for you and doing other things online, I did spend time going through, and I probably have thrown away around 1,000 reeds so far. And now I'm sort of going through these reeds that I have. And some of the reeds that I have date from my father. So they are antiques. And some of them I've kept just because they are antiques. Although I have to say, they're not very good. So maybe I'll make a sculpture or put them on the wall or something like that, but that's here. And the wonderful flutist of the quintet, which I've been proud to be a member of for many years, the New York Woodwind Quintet, which I think was probably the oldest continuing woodwind quintet, perhaps in the world, although I can't say that for sure because I really don't have the information about that. Not that I've been in it since the beginning by any means, but our flutist, Carol Winsense, came up with a brilliant idea when I was rejecting a reed. And says, we should have a company called Rejects. Rejects, that way, which would actually market rejected reeds from famous people. Just perhaps, to have as souvenirs or whatever. Well, if anyone wants some of these reeds, please let me know. No, but that's not what I have in mind. But all I want to say is that finally, what I have come to is you need quantity. That way. And that's especially true if you travel. And of course, none of us have been traveling as much as we used to be traveling. And I'm just beginning to travel again. And still not very much. Hopefully, I will be doing more. But it is slow beginning, restarting. But in any case, you can have a reed which works very well in one situation, doesn't work well in another situation. So, quantity is finally the answer. And that's why I do play many different kinds of reeds. And I don't just have one reed kind, one brand of reed that I play. And I'm saying this because I did get requests for talk about reeds, right? And I at some point I may mention about what to do, but I think that's so boring. I don't know if I will do that, in fact. And I see just about every week something on the internet about how to fix reeds, how to maintain reeds, and most of it I think is total nonsense. Uh-oh, I put my foot in my mouth again, and I'm sure I'll get certain kinds of hate mail from that. So anyway, but quantity is different kinds, so that one reed out of 100 reeds or whatever will definitely work. And I found that to be the case always. So when I travel, I do travel with a big quantity of different kinds of reeds, of different brands of reeds also, and of different strengths of reeds. I have to say, though, and this is a peculiarity of mine, although I'm not the worst person in that regard. I know at least one person, a wonderful clarinet player, whose name shall be nameless at the moment, who I think is much more extreme than I am in this regard. But I also carry different mouthpieces with me. Because sometimes it's easier to switch the mouthpiece than it is to switch the reed. And I do have different mouthpieces of different facings. Now, in order to do all of this, though, the basics of the embouchure that you have to be ingrained in you. And I have gone through this in several live streams, so I'm not going to do this again, just to say that the practice of the embouchure and this feeling this way of the strength and sort of control you have to practice without the clarinet as well as with the clarinet, because there's no way you can practice enough hours on the clarinet to actually internalize the sensitivity that you need to have an embouchure which actually has the flexibility to use different reeds, different mouthpieces, et cetera, and to find what is best. And also, you have the embouchure will allow you to take a reed which perhaps is not ideal, and to find how to make it work so it becomes close to ideal. And this is not something I will demonstrate today, but I will demonstrate this. Perhaps next week I will do something that is much more clarinet-centric. And again, I'm not sure whether it will be a video that I've recorded before or a live stream, but probably it takes just as long or longer to do the video than it does to do the live stream. So maybe I just do it at this time if I'm actually free for it. Okay, now the next thing, before I just go on to the coda, let's say, of this talk, it has to do with practicing, because I've been asked about that, and I think I talked about this, but I've talked about so much that I forget what I've actually talked about. So forgive me if I've mentioned this already too many times, and you say, oh, here he goes again. He's forgetting everything that he said. And that is that it's important to practice around things so that you don't have, in a way, tunnel vision. You're just not practicing one thing and just hoping that it gets better and better and better, but you practice so that becomes a subset of something larger. And in order to do that, I always have, let's say, in process, 3 different categories of music. So, category 1, let's say, the pieces that I am practicing for performance. And those pieces, of course, should be perfected. And ideally should be memorized. I've had a couple of queries about memorization. And I will just say about memorization, and I should talk a little more about it another time, specifically to one of those questions. But in general, memorization is very, very good simply because it makes you pay attention to detail that perhaps otherwise you would not pay attention to. And whether you end up playing by memory or playing from the music, for me, makes no difference at all. I actually don't care about that. Although I do care about that sometimes in lessons, because the student should know what they are doing. Okay, so this ideally you memorize. I should also mention that the conductor, Hans, I think it was Hans, or was it Hans? Knappersbusch. He was asked one time, he's a well-known composer from earlier in the 20th century, Knappersbusch. He was asked, he says, why do you use music when you are conducting? And he was sort of looked in a puzzled way. He says, oh, because I know how to read. That way. And of course, you had Toscanini, who conducted from memory, although his rehearsals, he always had a score by him just to check there. And he had very bad eyesight. So for him to conduct from the score would mean doing like that way. So he developed, of course, his memorization skills to a great degree. I should say, from my own experience with memorization, that very often what you play from memory is not, in a certain way, more free and spontaneous than what you play from the music. And will only become spontaneous after a long period of time. Because basically, when you memorize all, not simply, although there are some people who memorize in a kind of photographic way, and it's something that I do to an extent, actually, myself. But the memorization, and I was very bad at memorizing in the beginning because I didn't do that when I was a young student. So I think that memorizing from an early age is something quite important. The memorization involves not only memorizing, as I said, the sort of basic text, we say, but memorizing the actual gesture. You memorize the actual playing. So the playing becomes often not more free, but in a certain way less free. And that brings up something that I remember from my days in anthropology, to do with in societies without writing, memorization is incredibly important, because memorization is the way that information is preserved. That way. Then, of course, with the advent of writing, memorization became less essential to the continuation of society and culture, because you can always go back and refer to the printed word that way. And of course, our memories do play tricks on us. And so in memorization, there is a kind of evolution that occurs through generations, I will say. And if you have writing that can anchor things in a more historically secure way, I should say. I will speak about music notation another time, but the design of Western and I'm not being some kind of Western cultural supremacist here now, but the design of Western musical notation was very important for the way that Western music developed, and that's something that will be for another time. Okay, so I talked about the first. Now, what is the second? You see, I went off in this detour. So the second category are pieces that you work on to a certain extent, and then, of course, perhaps you leave them and you can come back to them, and then work on them again. So they can something you try to get up to a certain speed. You get up to sort of know the notes, etc., 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 and then perhaps you sleep on it, or you move on to something else. And the third category is music that you read through, and sight reading is very, very important, I think. I'm a very big believer in the value of sight reading, and I've got. I became especially aware of that when I went to Moscow to study at the Moscow Conservatory, because there, at that time, everybody memorized everything. So when I had to go for a lesson, it had to be memorized, right? And that for me was very difficult, because even though I was playing, and I think I've talked about this a lot, playing concerts before I went to Moscow was pretty well known. I didn't really memorize, because that was not something that clarinetists did. It's not something that any of my teachers, or I should say my two teachers, my father and Russianoff, and other people actually who I look at as mentors, such as the wonderful oboist Robert Bloom, or even the great cellist Aldo Pariso. That's where in their own ways influential for me. That none of them talked about or insisted on memorization at all. But in Moscow, here it was, I had to memorize. So this was like, wow, terrible thing for me. But what I noticed there was that people tended to learn things, well, perhaps in a methodical way, but in a very slow way. While the problem of my memorizing is that I could take almost any piece, and within a couple days I would know it. I would do it because my experience was in sight reading, and sight reading then allowed me to look at a piece of music and understand it in a very quick way, and not have to wait to sort of figure it out little by little this way until it sort of was memorized in my head. And it is interesting because basically I would memorize, if I'm sight reading and then going through something the second time, I will have memorized the basic shape of that, but not the detail this way, but I have it on paper and I could play it in that way. Also, if you learn to sight read, well, then you learn to grab and to identify patterns in music. So you can see ahead that there's a whole line of something, and it's not a line of 273 notes, but it's a line of one pattern, which they say, oh, okay, whoop, and it's fine. So sight reading is very, very important. Now we have these three categories, and a piece from category 3, for instance, where you sight read, can move to category 2. A piece from category 2, you can say, can move to category 1. And when I talk about etudes, I will be talking about the fact that I think that we can actually use etudes as concert pieces as well. And how the idea of etude or study has been in a certain way corrupted among clarinet players and among wind players, perhaps more than it has among strings and pianists, for instance, who do actually play etudes in concert. And even something from category 3 can move to category 1. That way. And then something in category 1 can be put aside, and then can be taken out at some point just for experience and become part of category 2, let's say. Won't become part of category 1 because you already know the piece. Okay, so this is how I like to practice myself, and how I like then that the category 3 pieces are not, even though those are the pieces, or let's say the piece, that if it's like the John Corigliano concerto, something like that, it's a major work which takes a lot of effort, even after one has played it a lot, to sort of bring it back into shape. So even if I'm practicing that, I end up practicing many more things around it that way. So that becomes a subset of more general kind of practice. And that's also good for the security of technique, because what is hard in one passage can actually involve parts of something which are not difficult in another passage or another piece, for instance. So that when you're practicing another piece, you come back to the piece in category 1 that you're playing. And you'll find that, oh, this is not so difficult now because I have a different perspective from practicing something else. Okay. I think I've said much more than I should have. And with that, I turn now, despite the strictures of Facebook, let's say, back to 1987, 1988, 1986, to this, my old recording from the Naumburg, just because the last week I had played the Mozart Quintet in conjunction, of course, with the 50th anniversary of the Chamber Music Award that the Naumburg Foundation has been giving out. And now on that same album, which is here, and I think you have it there, but that's what it looks like. This is the CD. It originally actually came out as an LP. I have that somewhere. There. Okay. Okay. So that this Musical Heritage Society recording was one of many recordings which the Naumburg Foundation collaborated with Musical Heritage Society to use as part of the Naumburg Prize. So for many years, that Naumburg artists recorded also for Musical Heritage Society. Now, Musical Heritage Society doesn't exist anymore, and their catalog has been taken over by another company, which actually, what should I say? Let me go and in fact tell you what this company is. I'm not going to tell you everything. It's not necessary. Yeah, it's the company in 2011. Musical Heritage became defunct, and their collection was purchased by Passionato. It's based in Montclair, New Jersey, and they say Musical Heritage Society had over 100,000 CDs, DVDs, etc., in their catalog titles. And Passionato is a provider of, as they say, DRM free classical music downloads. Now what that means, though, is in any case, that downloading these and actually streaming them should not involve copyright restriction. But the Facebook algorithms somehow block everything. It's something that has my name on it. It gets blocked. And this is not the banality of evil, but the banality so far of AI. These algorithms which are supposed to control what is possible and what is not possible to broadcast. So it's not even a person who's looking at this stuff. And of course, there's so much is going on, you can't have that. But these are algorithms, and these algorithms have been at fault for very many things. And they are at fault, of course, for the abuse of Facebook as well, of course, which have been documented by the whistleblowers. That is. Okay. Well, shall we try? We'll see what happens with this one. And in the meantime, I do try to get them reinstated or to move the archive to someplace where actually like that the recordings will be present and will not be blocked. So here it is. Oh, I don't think I mentioned. Did I mention what was going to be? It's the Weber Quintet. Here we go once again. Here we are. Here, Carl Maria von Weber. So these are famous works, which I thought would be nice to. And again, it's with the Mendelssohn Quartet in its very beginning configuration, with Laurie Smuckler first violin, Nicholas Mann second, Ira Weller viola, and Marcy Rosen cello.